Hey, Al, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, I can hear you.
Was I rugged for a bit there?
Were you talking? If you were, we couldn't hear you.
I'm having issues right now.
I mean, not only was I talking, I was presenting this amazing version of Lil Panda.
Well, we hear you now.
Honk on stage here, but
Having trouble getting Honk up here too. Twitter's being weird.
yeah.
I was wondering why you weren't all talking about how awesome this version is.
We just thought you were having a quiet moment.
There's never such thing. If ever I don't talk for that long, you should know that something's up.
I almost sent you a message on Discord. Like, you good?
No, I was rugged apparently, and I can't seem to get Honk up either. I don't know why. I keep trying at him.
Yeah, I can't either. I don't have an option to bring him up.
Honk, Twitter's being weird. You might have to go out and come back, my friend, and maybe we can get you up. In the meantime, if you're just joining, please retweet the room. Honk says this app is broken. Yeah, we're aware. We're aware. Small indie company. Give Twitter a break. Sometimes it works better than others. Hopefully Honk comes back and we can get him back up on stage. Yeah, I was playing this whole song and I was like, why is nobody reacting to Little Panda? It's amazing.
All right, Honk's back.
We got him. He's requesting.
Let's see. It's just rolling here on connecting again. This is what happened to me last time.
All right. It does seem like he's able to speak. Mr. Honk, are you there?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and sorry about the 2 minutes of dead air or whatever it was at the start. I thought you guys could hear me, but I guess you couldn't. So it all seems to have worked its way out. We worked out the kinks. If you're just joining, as I mentioned earlier, please retweet the room, get as many Lils in here as possible. I just wanted to have a casual Lil Lunch and Learn, and if you guys like these, we can take suggestions for different topics, but we thought that today it would be good to do a little lunch and learn about proof of work, proof of stake, and the ETH merge, since of course today is the first day on the proof of stake network for Ethereum, and so we thought we would celebrate that with a conversation about this. Honk was not sure he was able to make it, but luckily he is able to join us today. You may know him as a knife-wielding Nouner who terrorizes Discords, but he also is very knowledgeable about these things. So welcome, Mr. Honk.
Yay!
Honk, can you tell everybody, what is your background, without doxing yourself? I guess you're doxed, but what is your background and what's your expertise in these types of things?
Well, my background is just being a general sort of genius. I think my parents wanted me to be one of them violin aficionados because I was a savant as a kid, tracked by the CIA from the age of 3 after they saw my score on the IQ test. But so I decided to kind of just go off and do these startups that everybody was talking so heavily about. They seemed so tantalizing, kind of taking your own future and putting it in your own hands. And when I was stalking somebody on GitHub many moons ago in 2015, I saw this project called Ethereum, and I said to myself, this seems like something quite interesting, especially because the engineer who I was stalking was no run-of-the-mill engineer. This was a real professional here, somebody who I had learned quite a bit from in the past. So I began poking my nose around in 2015 into the Ethereum ecosystem and saw this little alien dude. And I was like, oh my goodness, this guy must be smarter than me because I don't understand any of the words coming out of his mouth. And I just went all in after that point.
Was this alien a Russian guy?
Yes, his name is Vitiligo, I believe. and I just saw him, and I knew that he would be my new god. He was so gaunt and awkward and so intelligent. I had to look up to him and understand all the words coming out of his mouth. And eventually I did end up working alongside this alien man, climbing up through the ranks in the Ethereum Foundation.
Awesome. How long did you work within the Ethereum Foundation?
I was a consultant and helped on a number of different things. I was not really a big fan of the nepotism that I saw within there, so I kind of saw my way out and also made a kind of a fuss, which was not very well favored by that group. But you know, I'm one to kind of shake things up every so often.
I was going to say I couldn't imagine you making a fuss anywhere.
So this matter of the merge and proof of stake is something that's been talked about for quite some time. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the big criticisms of blockchains is their extensive use of electricity. And while you will hear people in the Bitcoin space say that it is well warranted, as you know, value has to come from somewhere, mm-hmm. and if you look towards the past, you know, you'll see that raw resources were mined, hence the idea of mining. Effort was put forth, you know, dynamite, pickaxes, other heavy machinery to be able to extract raw materials from the earth. And so the whole idea of creating value from energy expenditure has always been something that's been well justified, hence the whole parallel drawn towards Bitcoin mining. Mm-hmm.
And also being called digital gold, for that matter.
Yeah, you see, it wasn't always that way, though. The narrative has changed quite a lot over the years, but now they are indeed, you know, referring it to digital gold. And for some reason, there was a point where Ethereum was referred to as digital oil. I was well aware of Bitcoin in 2011, but didn't really pay it too much attention because I'm just an old country bumpkin and didn't think that it had have to do any real sort of have any real impact on my life. I was having a buddy that was telling me, oh, this is the future, this sort of thing. Here, have these books. And I said, I'm a country bumpkin. I got to go milk the cows. Leave me alone.
But luckily later on, you were able to get away from the cows to work on Ethereum at least.
Indeed. But in 2015, when I saw that little alien man talking about the computers and decentralized and everything, it really, really resonated with me. So, you know, I suppose the main impetus of this call is to go ahead and discuss what's going on here.
Yes, exactly.
It's been a matter that's been coming before the inception of Ethereum as a means of being able to address some of the energy concerns that we've been speaking to.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I saw a post today that maybe some people don't know, but some people think that, you know, Ethereum was meant to be proof of work and that it's sort of a decision that's more recent for them to switch over to proof of stake. But in fact, it was mentioned in the Ethereum white paper by Vitalik that in the future it was very likely that ETH would switch to a POS model. Is that right?
That's correct. And there were actually a number of things known as ice ages that were built into the chain to kind of push the switch to proof of stake. However, the engineering feat turned out to be much more grand than initially expected. And so those got pushed back a number of times.
Can you explain that a little bit? What is an ice age? What does that mean?
It's basically the idea that difficulty becomes harder and harder so that blocks get slower and slower, basically making the chain unusable. So these had to be pushed back time and time again due to the difficulty in execution of these technical undergoings.
So that would be similar to what happened yesterday where they called it a difficulty bomb at the very end of the transition, where they basically raised the difficulty so high that the switch would take place. Is that right?
More or less, yes.
That's cool.
So, you know, the main thing which is really going on here is that we had a proof of stake chain. And for those who aren't familiar with proof of stake, it's more or less like somebody will go and they'll buy a miner, or maybe they'll run it on their computer. The difference here is that people will put up some amount of ETH in lieu. All right, I can't do the accent anymore. Some people will put up a certain amount of ETH in lieu of a miner. And in this case, it's 32 ETH. If you don't have 32 ETH, you can put up some percentage of it and join a pool. And if you and basically there are about 400,000 validators. So there's been a proof of stake beacon chain which has been running for since December of 2020, pushed forth by Prismatic Labs, and they've been running it for over 18 months as a means of being able to ensure that things were smooth and that there was an easy sort of means of being able to switch things over. They did this with the Robson testnet, some other testnet, as well as the Gourley testnet, before eventually switching over mainnet. And so it's kind of like the idea of switching out a car's engine as it's like driving.
Right.
And so basically what they did is they had a car, and because we're talking about saving energy, and electric cars are all the rage, you can imagine that you had a car that was running a gas engine. And I don't know if this app is bugging out or not.
Yeah, we can hear you, man.
Okay. Yeah. Imagine you have a car going down the road. It's got a gas engine. And you're like, all right, I need to switch out to an electric engine. How do I do that? Well, just completely disregarding absolutely everything about the inner workings of a car so as to not trigger people who are mechanics and actually understand cars.
We don't want to get DMs from mechanics about this.
Yeah. Well, in a very simple sense, you need to have the other engine. And so you get the other engine and you basically position it in parallel with the gas engine. And then you just take the hookups and you just switch them out. And so they had the parallel electric engine running for, again, 18 months to make sure that things were fine. They switched over test nets before going to the big boy, which is the main net. And so in proof of work, what happens is that basically I like to always give this sort of analogy. You always hear about truth by consensus, that sort of thing. You can imagine that you're in a classroom and a teacher asks a question, and say for instance 2 + 2 equals, and the first person to and basically the class of children decides what is the answer here. And so a kid raises his hand and he says 3, and the teacher says okay. Kid raises his hand and says 5. The teacher says okay. Kid raises his hand and says 4, and then a lot of kids after him also say 4, and so they become to agreement. So many kids say 4, in fact, that it's over 51% of the class. And so that basically what's happening is that everybody can say and propose a solution, but it's the first person who proposes a solution that the majority agrees with that becomes truth. Because because all of this quote unquote truth is based upon math, transaction ordering, etc. It becomes pretty straightforward for people to all basically fall in line with yep, that makes sense. We're all good here. So that kid that said 4 initially, after all these other kids basically said 4, and it's over 51% of the classroom, that kid's basically given a candy, right? And then they move on to the next problem. And that's kind of the whole idea of how proof of work works in a very simple sense. If that kid that said 5 and then everybody else had said 5 after him, and it was over 51%, then 2 + 2 would have been 5. That's the whole idea of truth by consensus. It doesn't. What
a crazy world it would have been if that had happened.
Yes, and indeed, and the whole idea of the kid who initially first spoke submitted the answer that everybody else agreed to, getting a candy, is the same idea as a block reward. So
one more thing for that analogy also is that all the kids are smoking cigarettes.
Sure. Because they're probably Russian. But
we just learned so much about Honk. That was amazing.
So, you're gonna learn more.
And so that's how I explain proof of work to people who aren't so familiar with the whole process.
That's good. I haven't heard that analogy before, but it's a good one.
Of course, it's my own analogy and it's genius. So the thing which proof of stake is doing is basically something known as MapReduce, which is a process which was devised by Google as a means of being able to basically split a problem into a lot of smaller problems and solve them independently and then like basically group the answer all together. But you'll never hear this, proof of stake in terms of Ethereum referred to as MapReduce, because a lot of the engineers aren't so familiar with like the stuff that Google was doing, and a lot of the things they were doing were kind of like reinventing the wheel, which is kind of, not great. At this point, a lot of them are familiar with MapReduce because the quality of engineers has gone up substantially. But basically what happens is that there are a lot of these individuals who have put out, 32 ETH as a means of staking it. And there are like something like, 400,000 plus validators. Now, that's a lot of validators. On the proof of stake chain, because like basically coming up with an answer to a math problem is more or less like subjective, because, it depends on how smart the kids are in the classroom, as well as how many kids are in the classroom, as well as how hard the problem is. Everything in proof of stake is at like 12 seconds, whereas there's variability with block times before. And this is because of the sort of, it isn't like a random sort of, like somebody has decided like you're going to be the one who proposes the next block, and either people are going to agree with you or they're not going to agree with you. And so it's like either the next block goes forward or we just remain at like the last one, and it's every 12 seconds. So the way that this works is, again, like 400,000 validators, that's a lot. We want them all to be involved because we want maximum security. So what happens is these 400 validators are divided into 32 groups every 32 blocks. And that's 6 minutes and 24 seconds. So every 6 minutes and 24 seconds, all these validators are basically split up into 32 groups, and they're randomly assigned using a process called RANDAL. And that's basically, I'm not going to get into it, but every time that a validator signs a message, they do it with something known as a private key, and nobody knows each other's private key. And so it generates more or less a random number because the message is always changing. It has to do with block data. And so they take all of these random signatures and they use that as a seed to be able to basically scramble validators. And this happens every 6 minutes and 24 seconds. So 400,000 validators split into, or more than that, split into 32 what are known as epochs. And an epoch is, again, every 32 blocks, 6 minutes and 24 seconds. And each of these quote-unquote epochs is assigned one block to validate. And so they each get their own turn. It's like a round robin sort of thing. And so, you have the first validator that's been selected in each like grouping of 32 is the one who gets to propose a block. And because so like they go ahead and they're like, hey, this looks pretty good. What do you guys think? And they need to do that within 4 seconds. If they don't do it within 4 seconds, then basically everybody's like, all right, like you're too slow. We're just gonna skip you basically, and we're gonna stick with the last block, and we're gonna, the next like of the 32 groups is just gonna get to decide, what the next block is.
Is that related? Is that related at all? So, for example, we played FOMO this morning on 9 o'clock, and we noticed that that's almost exactly how long we had to vote, was 4 seconds, and then it went to try to settle. Is that related or just coincidental?
Coincidental.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
So, well, I mean, like, it's semi-related. Sorry, it is related. But, the thing is that, like, you still have time to wait for the block to be, finalized. And so the process of finalization is like all the other people in each of these quote unquote epochs more or less agreeing like, all right, like here's my check for it, right? Like I'm voting for this block. Now, if you have 400,000 validators and you have 32 of these epochs, you've got over 10,000 signatures that you need to look out for. And that is a lot of data, So what is used here are something known as Bonnet-Lenschaft signatures, which are basically threshold signatures. And I'll give you like an example of this. So say for instance, Toady and I, who's the host of this space, wanted to create a threshold signature, a BLS signature. You can think of it in terms of colors. Say that my signature was blue and his signature was yellow. And if we combine those two signatures, we get green. And the only way that you can get that green color is you combine those two signatures. And you can think of this in terms of wavelengths. You can think of it in terms of a lot of things. It really has to do with elliptic curves, but I'm not going to get into that because this is not a mathematics course, and it would be too much precursor material. So we'll stick to colors, and say that Victor, who's also a speaker here, that his signature is red, mine is blue, and if we combine them, we get purple. So you can think about a very similar thing. There are so many colors on the spectrum that you
did
look
that on
at.
purpose for the heart, huh?
Sorry?
You did that on purpose for the purple heart, huh?
Oh, sure. And, you can think of that as like, all right, well, all these guys basically has a unique sort of color, and we're going to assign it to them in such a way that if we have a certain percentage, we will end up with colors that look like the following, and they fit into a certain category. And so you can think about, I can't really go over I'm not an artist, so I can't get into all the shades, etc. But it's this whole idea of all right, if we have a certain threshold of validators within our epoch, so over 10,000 to agree this is legit, this is good, we basically can roll it up into one color. So all the signatures roll up into one color, and then it gives us just that one signature that we have to deal with. So it really reduces the potential sort of storage by summing up the whole idea of this over 2/3 of this group was for this block. So this is the representation of that. So, between epochs, the first validator is chosen. They make a proposal of a block within 4 seconds. If that doesn't happen, they're basically just skipped. If it does happen, then other validators look at the block. If it's found that the block has malicious or is doing something bad, that validator is slashed. If it looks good, then they...
What does slash mean, Hunk? They lose part of the...
Okay, so every validator has money which is put up that's basically serves as a bond. And if they're basically putting this money up to say hey, I'm going to be a good guy. And if I'm not a good guy, you can go ahead and punish me. And here's what you can punish me from. So basically, if the other validators look at what has been proposed and they're no, this is garbage. You're trying to sneak something in that isn't legit. They can punish the validator. And so it's a really good sort of mechanism to inhibit that sort of malicious behavior. So then if the block's proposed and it gets a threshold signature from over 2/3 of the participants, it is then finalized and it's added, and then we move on to the next group of validators inside the next epoch. So that's kind of high level.
That's proof of stake. So let me ask you this. In your opinion, is there a trade-off at all of security between something like Bitcoin with proof of work, or even what ETH was just yesterday, versus a proof of stake system?
Absolutely. The way in which this is designed is quite clever, with a lot of interesting sort of game mechanics to disincentivize negative sort of behavior. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of in individuals being able to do anything to potentially subvert the legitimacy of the chain, I think that's really unlikely. However, when you talk about validators and pools, the biggest pools have a really big swing And the biggest one, Lido, is controlled by a DAO. And the DAO has these tokens called Lido Tokens that basically assist in deciding what sort of validators can enter into their pool.
And this is one of those pools that you mentioned earlier. If you don't have 32 ETH of your own, you can join one of these pools.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And the thing is that Lido has a lot of, the lion's share of validators. And so that's the pool that you really want to join because, they basically split up rewards, that sort of thing. Like you want to join the winning team. And a number of very prestigious firms, most notably Paradigm, has stated that there's going to be one real validator pool that just wins it all, and they said it's going to be Lido, and they went and I think they bought something like 10% of all the Lido DAO tokens, and so any sort of things that go on, basically the proof of stake chain is going to be run by a DAO, the Lido DAO, and there's going to be a few groups that have a very large stake in that, particularly like Paradigm, A16Z, which a lot of people have had some very negative sort of opinions of, calling it like a sort of VC chain. Mm-hmm. I think that is a very, very it can be dangerous. However, there are 5 pools that control Bitcoin simultaneously.
I was just going to mention that, yeah.
And so, it's kind of all right, which one would you prefer? Would you prefer the one that is, run by a few VCs, firms, as well as a large community, or one which is just run by these pools? It's a different sort of, and I hate to say this word, but it's a different sort of paradigm. But it's very similar to kind of the old way. The fact is that there are hubs in these decentralized ecosystems, and pooling is just one means of accomplishing that. So it's an inevitable sort of thing.
It speaks to the inherent difficulty of decentralization. Anyway, is that there's always people that will see areas for exploitation and profit and move in, right?
Yes.
But in any case, switching back to the positive side of things, can we talk a little bit about ETH issuance and how that's changed overnight, basically?
Yeah, there was a triple halving, is what they called it, which is the whole idea of basically Bitcoin has these things called the halving or the halvening, which is where issuance halves every 2 years, and
that means they pay half as much of a reward to the miners. So it should
3 years
over a medium term make miners mine less Bitcoin because they're getting less rewards, I guess is the short answer.
Yeah, and so that is so the triple halving was basically reduces the ETH inflation rate from 4.3. It was 4. I think it was 4.3% to 0.5% or something like that.
In terms of ETH, it was 16,000 ETH a day was what was being paid out to miners before, and now I think it's closer to 1,600.
Yeah, so it's a one order of magnitude. In terms of reduction. So that's the big sort of. I mean, that's a massive impact.
Yeah. So before they were creating 16,000 ETH a day just to pay the miners, and of course those miners had bills to pay and stuff. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But 16,000 ETH a day was going just to keep the consensus layer going, and then now it's 1,600 a day. But still, that is still issuance. So why are people saying that now ETH is going to be deflationary? What's the missing piece of the puzzle there?
Well, I mean, there's also things which are burned in terms of fees, etc. And let me just correct something that I said earlier. I misspoke. I said that Bitcoin's happening. It's happened every 2 years. It's every 4 years, approximately, every 2,100 blocks.
Right.
But the thing is that there's a lot of things which are burned in terms of fees. That was a big push a while ago with an update that happened earlier. I can't recall exactly what the name of the update was, but that was a really big deal.
That would be EIP 1559.
Yes, 1559. And if you add that, it's like a 0.4% inflation rate. That in tandem with the burned fees, with people just like losing ETH, it is deflationary. I mean, the fact is that the amount of money printed is not going to exceed the amount of money lost and burned. So that's the whole idea there.
And the other thing to remember, too, is that we are in a bear market. So use of the network is at an all-time low. Obviously, you guys have seen gas prices come down. If you've been around for a year or even 6 or 7 months, you would have seen those high gas prices when it would have cost, $200 to mint an NFT sometimes in ETH terms. And now it costs, 12. So I think on the Bankless podcast, they mentioned that 16 Gwei is like the minimum gas price where ETH will remain deflationary. If it falls below that, so if demand gets even lower for Ethereum, it could temporarily become inflationary again. But the more likely scenario, of course, is that eventually, we'll go back into a more favorable market, and the usage of the network will go up. And at that point, it becomes sort of hyper deflationary the higher gas goes, because the more gas that's used, the more is burned.
Yep.
So that's an interesting piece of the puzzle there as well. Let me think. What else was I going to ask about? Yes. So selling pressure. I had a question about that because that was something someone asked me about yesterday. So when miners are taken out of the picture, what does that do for like the selling pressure theoretically on ETH as an asset?
I mean, so obviously, it really depends. There's a lot of different mining operations. And obviously, they need to pay their bills, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole 1559, I remember that being something that was very unpopular with miners. And so, if you no longer have all of this hardware infrastructure that's needed to maintain the chain, they're basically being obsolesced, which is kind of sad because they were a big part. They were the network. And so I would think that selling pressure would be, the fact is that a lot of these markets aren't very liquid when you compare to traditional markets. And so you can very easily, I'm legitimately, I was just at the New York Stock Exchange last night talking about stuff like this. So you can have a big buyer or seller come in and tank the market pretty easily. You can very strategically place $10 million on the books and tank the market for ETH by, a few, $150, which you'd think whoa, that's nuts. This is over, this is, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Mm-hmm. But it just goes to demonstrate that, these assets really don't have that much volume on the books in terms of like trading power, etc.
So what I'm hearing is we're still early. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly the case. And there are a lot of exchanges that I've been going back and forth with who are asking for assistance in putting more volume on their books because of this issue. So in terms of like reduction, in terms of selling pressure, that isn't necessarily going to happen that much, just because, yeah, there won't be miners who are trying to offload ETH. But I would argue that they aren't really the ones who are controlling the market. I would argue that the market is controlled by a single group, and that they're the one that really decides where things goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you said, it can take a very small nudge to push crypto markets one way or the other.
Yes. Another thing to note here is that is a lot of money in liquidating people. And, like, for instance, a popular exchange, BitMEX, was well known for basically hunting very heavily leveraged positions.
Right.
And everybody does this. It's something that's publicly available information. They want to be able to, because the thing is that whenever you liquidate a heavily leveraged position, you can get a cascading effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put in, say for instance, you see some people that are long, and you have a very large position, you can go ahead and put in a short, and then have a massive, market sell, which will cause these cascades for the price to dump, and then you immediately close out the short. This is like a very common practice with larger firms.
One of the main reasons not to go too crazy with your LTV if you're ever borrowing against your crypto or borrowing at all to buy crypto, because exactly what Honk is saying, like we saw so many of these cascading liquidations at the end of the last bull market where it would just be, one thing after another, and we would go from 40K BTC to 30K BTC overnight because of it and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not an unusual thing for Bitcoin to drop 10% in the span of about 15 seconds. That's happened many times. And so that just goes to, back up that whole idea of these cascading liquidations. In fact, as an old timer, I can tell you that I think sometime in 2017 or 2018, I think ETH dropped to like 1 cent on Coinbase, and somebody was very, very happy because they got filled at 1 cent.
I had heard, speaking of that, I had heard some people mentioning that they thought there could be some Oracle issues last night with things like Aave and DeFi, other DeFi apps, but I didn't hear anything about that, so maybe those were unfounded concerns. Was there ever a concern really that could have happened? For example, that Aave lost track of its cost basis for ETH and accidentally liquidated people, stuff like that.
It's always a concern, but I don't see why it would have happened.
Well, anyway, it didn't happen, so that's good. We did a merge emergency broadcast, we called it, yesterday here on TNS, and it was fun, and it was a little bit nothing really happened, which was kind of the point. So we had Dev Carrot on with us, and he just basically said, well, in an ideal world, this will be very non-eventful, because if it is eventful, then we might be having some problems. So as far as though, Honk, the merge is all completed successfully, and there's no issues at all?
No, I'm not aware of anything which is outstanding. I mean, there was an immense amount of due diligence insofar as testing, so.
Yeah, that's true. So I want to open it up. First of all, I want to thank you, Honk, for coming on to speak. I think everyone's just kind of mesmerized by your knowledge. You really know a lot about the subject, and sometimes people might be used to hearing you joke around, and that's fun too. But you really have a lot of knowledge, and so I appreciate you sharing with us. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Honk, who might be here on the stage? And if you're not on the stage, you can request to come up as well. We'll save the last 10-15 minutes here for questions from the crowd about anything related to proof of work, proof of stake, Ethereum, and the merge. Anyone?
Hey, Honk. I just want to thank you for coming out today. This was honestly super educational and just informational and enjoyable to listen to. I guess my only question for you would be what are you most excited for next?
The next thing that's going to be happening is sharding, which is very much, it's a much more difficult problem. It also kind of is more or less the sort of MapReduce thing that I was speaking to. That is the whole idea of being able to just scale Ethereum beyond a single chain. And it does that through basically segmenting out a lot of different functionality into different shards. And you've heard this with parachains and Cosmos, this network of blockchains, but this is Ethereum sort of approach. And it's been on the books for a long, long time. And there are a number of difficulties with cross-chain communication that are just really hard to resolve. And I look forward to kind of seeing that come more of a reality.
This kind of is relevant to a question that we got yesterday, actually, on the Noun Square, which is someone asked about gas prices and whether this was going to keep gas prices low, because that seems to be a common misconception that happened both when EIP 1559 was instituted and now again with the merge. This doesn't have anything to do with the gas prices. Can you explain why, Honk?
Because it doesn't.
Fair.
That's not a part of it whatsoever.
Yeah, it just doesn't have anything to do with that part.
Gas is just gas does.
But when you're talking about things like sharding and also, which by the way, they probably could have found a better name for that. Every time I hear it, I'm just like, really? That's what you chose to go with? But anyways, sharding and they also are doing things with roll-ups and whatnot, I guess. Can you explain to us what are ZK roll-ups and what are these roll-ups that are hoping to help with that exact thing, keeping things moving at a more economical price per transaction over time?
So roll-ups are something which has already been implemented. You might be familiar with the thing known as optimism.
Yes.
Optimism has a name, optimism, for a reason. It has what are known as optimistic roll-ups involved in it, which is this whole idea of like, hey, we're going to optimistically assume that the stuff that we see here is legit, and we are going to go ahead and kind of move forward, assuming that state's right. However, anybody can go ahead and tell us like, hey, this is not legit, and here's my mathematical proof to demonstrate that, and then we can go ahead and revert it, if that makes sense. And so the whole idea of like optimism and roll-ups is, if you're familiar with, again, the roll-up thing is kind of like what I was talking about in a very different sense with the colors and the signatures that, Toadie's yellow, I'm blue, and so we combine ourselves and we get green. So the green that we get represents, like, you couldn't have created that without yellow and blue. You couldn't have done it. And so we know that both of those two things were involved. And so we submit green to Ethereum, and because it was submitted to Ethereum, we know that there was a green and a yellow that were a part of that. Or sorry, there was a blue and a yellow that were a part of that green. And if somebody comes through and is trying to say like, oh, here's a purple, and Victor, who's red, is like, nah, man, like I never did anything in that last block. He can go ahead and contest it. And then it'll be like, oh, okay, well, there might not have been a blue, but at least there was a red. It might not have been a red, but at least there was a blue. And so the whole idea of roll-ups is basically taking a lot of separate transactions and grouping them together. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of optimistic is basically assuming that what we have is legit, but having a period for contesting it, and allowing things to be rolled back. Interesting.
And so how long are we talking with that type of a period? Is it like minutes, hours, days?
It really depends on the implementation. I'm not as familiar with how optimism goes about it.
Okay, interesting. So that's one type of roll-up, and I know this could be a subject for an entire other spaces, but can you touch briefly on the other type of roll-up, which is ZK or zero knowledge?
That's not an area that I'm comfortable talking about.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to come back to that on another day, but I think that's an interesting one to learn. I just thought you knew everything, so I was going to keep rolling with it until.
I do know everything, but that's down a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. What about sharding?
Zero knowledge is basically this whole idea of say that you don't want to give somebody your age, but you want to demonstrate that you're over 16. So you show them that you have a driver's license, and you can put your hand over the date. But, the fact is that, there's no way for you to have gotten a driver's license without being over the age of 16. That's one thing. Another thing is that, say, for instance, you want to show that you're over 18, do the same thing with cigarettes. It's this whole idea of being able to prove some piece of information without actually revealing the information itself. So it's like having clues to be able to show that something is true without revealing the thing itself.
Interesting. So it anonymizes things, but not Like not 100%? Is that right? Or
Yeah, like one such example of this would be like, for instance, say for instance that you had a treasure chest, Tody, and you had a key to it. And as far as you're concerned, you're the only person that's ever had it, and you know what's inside there, that sort of thing. One day I come up to you and I hand you a picture, and it's a picture of the treasure chest opened in your place. So that is like demonstrating without me showing you that I have a key or some way of opening the treasure chest. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it's very similar to that sort of in that fashion.
That's really interesting. Going back to something you said a little bit earlier with sharding, I don't know if you know about this either, but I've heard a lot about dank sharding, which I understand is some kind of like an interim fix for sharding. Do you know what the difference is between those two by chance?
No. I don't keep up with those memes.
That's okay. We'll have to.
Dank sharding?
Too dank for Honk.
Okay.
Well, we'll have to get Vitalik on that Russian alien you mentioned earlier and see if he can tell us about dank sharding.
Yeah.
The point is, there's a lot of scalability things being worked on by the Ethereum Foundation, but the merge itself was not one of them, I guess, is a good summary.
Yes.
Awesome. Anyone else here who's on stage have any questions for our guests? Victor?
Honk, what's the bench press looking like these days?
Oh, jeez.
So I've just been chilling at 400. Have not broken past anything recently, probably due to traveling and such.
It's crazy how quickly you lost your Texan accent.
Same, actually.
Just being in New York for a few days or a couple of days and you lost your accent already. It's crazy.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens so fast. Can you tell us what you were doing at NYSE yesterday, or is it a secret?
Yeah, that's what I'd like to know. That was my question.
Oh, what do you know about what I was doing?
I don't know anything, actually.
No, the other one, the Nounish, whatever. I can't read the rest of your name. What do you
It's
know?
Prop. It's Prop. I was just curious what you were doing and at the. I was like, did he just say he was at the New York Stock Exchange? Just wondering.
Yeah, so that picture is like, again, proof that I was at the New York Stock Exchange without me explicitly stating it. But I was there doing stuff, trying to help legitimize crypto a bit more with TradFi. So that's kind of that.
Much appreciated.
That's cool. I hadn't seen the picture actually, but I just saw it and I pinned it up for people to see. So we'll do one last call for any questions here. If anyone who's on the stage.
That's called snitching.
Snitching? Snitches get stitches, so we'll have to be careful. Anyone who's here from the Lil's community wants to put up their hand and ask a question, don't be shy. Got a very knowledgeable guest here, and you don't want to be hitting yourself later thinking, I should have really asked this. I'm never gonna know the answer to this now. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll give it a couple more minutes. And maybe in the meantime, Al, I saw you made an announcement about a couple things in the Lil's Discord. You want to just reiterate that for everybody in the meantime while we wait to see if there's another question or two?
Sure. Yeah, I was just spouting off about voting. I think we got one vote today that ends in like 10 hours for the Noun Acquisition Committee. We've got an additional vote coming up for the newsletter. I think that doesn't start for another day or two. And then I also called out Prop House. The vote ends tomorrow at 6 p.m. EST.
Awesome. So seeing some good pops come through that little Prop House. It's going to be hard to choose a winner.
Yeah. At least we get to choose 10 this round.
Absolutely. Anybody have a question for Honk? We'll do a last call. Who do we have on?
Thanks, Honk. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Honk is for the birds.
There's a bird.
Well, I think this was really great, and I think if people enjoyed it, we can make it a series every few weeks and try to have an expert on to answer some questions about certain crypto things or nouns-related things, and that way we can all learn together. What do you think, Al?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great idea.
I like that Honk is just a self-proclaimed genius and then actually comes with all the facts.
Well, if you're going to call yourself a genius, you better be able to back it up, right?
You actually can back up the genius. It's amazing.
One of these days, I'm going to bring Will Price on here and we're going to debate and I'm going to totally humiliate him. He's going to cry and he's like, why are you so mean to me, Hong? I just want to be friends. He's going to be there with blood coming out of his mouth and a knife in his chest. And I'm going to say, it could have been differently. You should have just added me to the tech council. You shouldn't have forestalled my entrance.
There's the honk that we all know.
Okay, that's the one I was expecting.
Any parting words, Honk, about anything you're working on at Nouns? I know you've been hard at work on a lot of things with Rocco, and anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, there's a Rocco podcast which is now live. Oh wow! I wish I knew how to share it with this darn technology. I guess I'll put it on here, but. Yeah, Rocco's slowly becoming sentient and more aware of nouns. Takes a lot of time, but, thankful for all the people that are getting involved. AI is definitely something that you don't want to be left behind on because, it's an inevitability. It's becoming more and more useful as time goes on. And, I'm excited to see where that goes.
What do you think the importance of AI will be for communities like Nouns going forward in the future?
As a means of assisting with data overload, as well as helping to align people in terms of governance. Obviously, governance is something that has plagued people for a long time as a human problem, because it is, and I'm not saying that AI will solve it, but I think that it can certainly assist and help provide different perspectives, which is more or less really what the intention of AI is. It's not necessarily to solve any problems, but it just assists and help to ideate around ways of addressing them and mitigating their impacts.
Very cool. This is kind of apropos of nothing, but I heard a podcast with Zuko from what's his I think he's from Zcash. Yeah, Zcash. And he was on Bankless recently, and they got talking about AI, and he mentioned something interesting, which was that he believes that in the future, all humans should have the right to be represented by their own AI, just similarly to how all humans currently, well, at least in Western democracies, all humans are able to have the right to be represented by a lawyer if charges are brought against them. He's saying that if Google's AI or TikTok's AI or whatever is asking for your information or your permission, blah blah blah, you should be able to be represented by an AI of your own with your own interests at stake. What do you think about that? Really completely out there from what we're talking about today, but I wanted to get your opinion.
I think it's pretty dumb. I think that Zuko is pretty good in terms of cryptography. Obviously, he was one of the guys that pushed for Zcash. Really, and also he's Israeli. Shout out. But in terms of the whole idea of AI for everyone, I think that that's totally legit. But the whole idea of your AI, going through and understanding TikTok's terms of service, that sort of thing, it becomes bots versus bots, which is a really big sort of thing that happens on Wall Street nowadays. I would say that on the New York Stock Exchange, probably 95% of the volume comes from within 3 to 4 miles of where a 3 to 4 mile radius of the stock exchange itself. Which isn't to say that there can't be impacts of retail. There certainly have been with things like, GameStop, et cetera, AMC. But that being said, most of the money being traded on Wall Street is bots versus bots. And so it's kind of a wash. And it's the people with the better bots that are going to, come out on top. And I'm sorry, but, the people with the most data are going to do, the best in terms of their bots. On top of that, the bots that you're going to be utilizing that are going to be the most useful are going to be provided to you by those parties with the most data, e.g. Google, Facebook, Amazon. And so your bot that's going to be used to represent you is going to be a derivative of their bot. And so as their bot is advancing, having things that are going on under the radar that you're not aware of, akin to the whole idea of there are a lot of government projects that we're not aware of that are, much more advanced than certain things that we might imagine being, of the government being capable of today. There are plenty of other undercover projects that with Google X, things like that are under wraps that are probably well beyond what's publicly available. So I think it's kind of a boondoggle. I think it's really dumb that he said that. I think that AI can greatly assist with people, but the whole idea of bots versus bots, it's that the house is more or less always going to win.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. Someone's got to make the bot, and there's always going to be that inherent bias, I guess, from the bot to whichever company created it.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, thanks again, Honk, for joining us and enlightening us on the merge, and really liked the analogies that you used for proof of stake and proof of work, some of which I'd never heard before. Hopefully our audience also appreciated them. And for those of you who are here, if you enjoyed this little lunch and learn and you'd like to see some in the future, please reach out to me, Toady, or Lil Al, and let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future episodes. We'll also be doing these little noun halls every week, not always a little lunch and learn, but sometimes just topics like we've been doing in the past. So if you have a project that you're working on within Little Nouns, or just something that you'd like to see us address, bring it to us and we can create that for a show for next week. And as far as TNS, the Noun Square Soapbox, we do have a slight announcement of a change for Prof. Werder. We're going to be doing Little Sisters at 5 p.m. EST instead of 4 p.m. Is that right?
Is that a go for sure on your end?
We'll figure it out on our end to get it started up for you. We may not be able to stick around and host, but we'll definitely get it fired up. So we'll have basically a 2-hour break after this on the Soapbox, and then Little Sisters will take over at 5 p.m. Also, Narsdow will be doing their first Soapbox tonight at 8 p.m. and it's going to be a jam session, a musical spaces. So that should be fun as well. And then, of course, we're back here every single day for Noun O'Clock. First thing in the morning, EST time. It's going to be about 9:30 tomorrow. So we're getting closer into the normal part of the day and out of the night for us anyway. So that's great. Al,
Pretty soon I'll be able to do Noun O'Clock in class. That'll be fun.
Ooh,
coming soon. I think we got about maybe 2 weeks, and then I can get it right into class.
Well, we should have you on as our guest, as our guest with your.
That'd be fun.
Let's do it. We did a whole series of technical guests this past week. I actually wanted to have Honk on with Rocco, but I didn't want to scoop the podcast that he was working on with CDT. I want to listen to that, and we'll give it a couple of weeks, and then maybe we'll have Rocco on a different time. But I'm curious to see what happened. I did pin that above, Honk, so if anyone wants to go take a look at that podcast, it is up, and you can listen to it. And as I understand it, the interview is actually with Rocco, right, Honk?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what his or her voice sounds like. Well, thank you, everybody, and happy Merge Day. I'm still going to call it Merge Day. It's our first day fully on Proof of Stake. Nothing blew up. It was just like Y2K, a whole lot of hullabaloo for nothing, and we all survived. So thank you, guys. Hope you learned something today, and we'll see you guys all next week.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, everybody.
Is it just me, or is this version of the song better than the original?
I kind of like it. It's
That never gets old.
Another one. Another one.